What's good? It's Woog. Oh boy, here we go. Anthony Joshua, 27 wins and 3 losses, taking on Francis Ngannou, 0 wins, 1 loss, although his MMA career was 17 wins and 3 losses. This fight is taking place on a Friday, March 8th in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. This is the latest in a series of high-profile mega events that the Saudis are putting on, spearheaded by the efforts of Turki Al-Sheikh, or His Excellency. And man, what a difference a year makes. Francis Ngannou, if you want to know what the betting odds are, Anthony Joshua is the favorite in this one, as he should be, but he's not nearly like as big a favorite as he would have been had this fight been scheduled like 9 months ago, a year ago. He's going off at a minus 350, so a 3.5 to 1 favorite. Francis Ngannou is a plus 380, close to a 4 to 1 underdog. And after Ngannou's performance against Tyson Fury, where Ngannou in his only professional boxing fight fought to a split decision loss against Tyson Fury in a fight where, heading into the scorecards, a lot of people thought that Ngannou did enough to win it. I thought that it was almost razor close. Ngannou scored that 3rd round knockdown, and there were like a few swing rounds. I thought Fury finished off relatively strong, but he never really seized control of the fight. Even the rounds that Fury seemed to be winning, they were kind of like, I think he won that round, but it wasn't anything demonstrative. So a lot of people thought that Ngannou won the fight. I thought that Fury edged a decision, so I wasn't mad at that decision. Either way, to say that this was a moral victory for Francis Ngannou would be putting it very, very mildly. This felt like one of the most shocking moments of 2023 in all of combat sports. I mean, you had a few shocking moments. You had, Terrence Crawford's destruction, one-sided destruction over Errol Spence. I would put this one, even though Ngannou didn't pull off an upset or anything, just his performance, and not only the knockdown, but Fury's inability to control like the slower rounds. That was just jaw-dropping. I sat there in amazement. I'm sure many of you sat there just confounded and trying to make sense of what you were watching, as this debutante in Francis Ngannou, who was just transitioning from the MMA world, and he still is in PFL. Like, he's talking about returning to the cage. I have to see it to believe it. I mean, I find it difficult to imagine somebody who's making the type of money that they're making in boxing right now, then returning to the cage for significantly less money, where you then have to absorb leg kicks and do all of these things that, aren't really suited for a 38-year-old or a 37-year-old who's going to be turning 38 in September. I mean, leg kicks are brutal in itself. That's enough of a reason to want to just stay away from mixed martial arts and to solely do boxing. Like, once Anderson Silva got beat by Uriah Hall, he never returned to the cage. And I mean, we remember the gruesome injury that the Spider Silva suffered in the rematch against Chris Weidman. And he also suffered a very bad leg injury against Jared Cannonier. Those leg kicks and the role that legs play in MMA is enough to get an older, aging MMA fighter to say, nah, let me just stick with this boxing. You couple that with the multitudes more money that Ngannou is receiving in these boxing fights. Again, I have trouble envisioning him re-entering a cage. But Francis Ngannou overperformed like no other against Tyson Fury. And Fury says that he was training like 3 months for this fight. Look, I just can't buy it. Like, even if I wanted to take Fury at his word and to say, hey, no, Ngannou was just like a matchup issue, or just presented problems that Fury was having trouble getting around, and Fury didn't take this fight lightly. I'm looking at Fury, and no, Fury's never been like an Adonis, physically, in terms of his physical stature, or at least his muscle definition. But I'm just looking at this performance, and maybe it's just for my own sanity, but I just can't believe that Tyson Fury trained for this Ngannou fight like he would have trained for, I'm sure he's training for the Usyk fight, or like he trained for the rematch against Deontay Wilder. And even in saying that, I don't want to take credit away from what Francis Ngannou gave us that day. Again, it was remarkable, and I'm still really trying to make sense of, like, what are my takeaways going forward? You know what I mean? As I now assess Anthony Joshua versus Francis Ngannou. But a couple things about this fight. One, it's on a Friday. Interesting. March 8th. It's going to be on a Friday, not a Saturday. Again, it's taking place in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And if you consider I think it's an 8-hour time difference between the East Coast of the United States. So New York, Washington, D.C. is 8 hours behind Saudi Arabia. So me on the West Coast would be 11 hours behind. So basically, if it's taking place, if like the main event is taking place like in the evening, or when like a UK fight, so it's basically going to be taking place like around where a British fight would take place in terms of when the main event starts. The main event starts, I believe, like at around 6 p.m. on the East Coast, which would be 3 p.m. on the West Coast. So that would basically be early AM, like very early, like what the time that I would be waking up to watch a fight in Japan on the West Coast is about the time that it would be at, where the main event would actually be taking place in Saudi Arabia. So it's going to be like super early in the morning over there. But the promotion for this fight has been very unusual. It's been fantastic. If you look at the trailers, just look at the imagery, look at the money that they're spending building this thing up. Look, I've done separate content on what Saudi Arabia's involvement in mega boxing and big boxing events might mean for boxing, good and bad. I just don't know if that business model is sustainable. And as much as I, am thrilled that we're not only going to get this, we're about to get, hopefully, Fury versus Usyk. If that rescheduled date, in fact, goes forward and they end up fighting, we get that. And then on June 1st, we're getting Artur Beterbiev versus Dimitri Bivol. I love all that. Given what they are paying the fighters and what is getting put forth in terms of the promotion and everything surrounding these fights that seemingly can't get made in the United States, in the UK, right? We haven't gotten some of these fights that they're putting on out here. The US, UK, the other powers that be weren't able to make Beterbiev versus Bivol. Saudi Arabia's had this ability to throw money at the event and make it happen. I don't know what happens to the rest of boxing in the wake of that. What happens to the rest of the boxing economy? But that's another video for another day. Right now, we're getting Anthony Joshua versus Francis Ngannou. But again, check out the trailer. Check out everything that's going into this promotion. I mean, hats off. I love it. It's got this arcade video game, movie cinematic like angle. It's just really remarkable. And I think that that's one of the entertainment based things that boxing has been missing. Although I do think that Top Rank does a pretty good job at least their fight posters, their flyers. I don't love how ESPN as a platform treats boxing. Like, you've got to search the queue like crazy to even find a fight. But I do like the Top Rank fight posters. But yeah, let's size up Anthony Joshua versus Francis Ngannou. On paper, Anthony Joshua is a couple inches taller. I saw them, nearly facing off, and I don't see a 2-inch height advantage. And I suspected that I wouldn't. When this fight was announced, I was like seeing 6'6" versus 6'4". I'm like, Ngannou? If Ngannou's 6'4", then Joshua's not really 6'6". They both look about 6'5", or at least like within an inch of each other height-wise. Maybe in the ring, it'll look different, but just in terms of the face-offs that I've seen, they look about maybe a half an inch to an inch apart. In terms of reach, Anthony Joshua has an 82-inch reach, at least on paper. Francis Ngannou's got an 83-inch reach. So Francis Ngannou has a slight reach advantage. This is, okay, so obviously Anthony Joshua's got the pedigree, he's got the experience, he's been in a lot of competitive fights against future Hall of Famers, current Hall of Famers. I think Vladimir Klitschko's already in the Hall of Fame. Let me know if I'm mistaken in that, but I think he was inducted. But Anthony Joshua has been in there against Klitschko, Andy Ruiz twice. He's been in there against Alexander Povetkin, Kubrat Pulev, Joseph Parker, Alexander Usyk twice. Anthony Joshua has tons of experience. Plus, he's got a lot of physical tools. He's got natural, punching power with both hands. He's knocked people out with right-handed uppercuts, left-handed hooks, straight rights. He puts it all together. Francis Ngannou, He's had a phenomenal MMA career. I mean, he's one of the greatest knockout artists of all time. I kind of look at him as being arguably the hardest puncher in MMA history. Like, it's a short list. I mean, Fedor Emelianenko had a great punch. Pound for pound, you've had Anthony Rumble Johnson, the late Anthony Rumble Johnson, phenomenal puncher. I mean, Chuck Liddell the Iceman was a great puncher. Derek the Black Beast Derek Lewis, great puncher. You've had some excellent punchers. I look at Francis Ngannou as being arguably on the top of that entire stack. It's just almost unfathomable how hard of an MMA punch with those size gloves Francis Ngannou brought to the cage. Not to mention, he's not slow-fisted. Now, here's one thing to consider. When he fought Cyril Gane in his latest MMA fight, where he defended the title that he had just won off of Stipe Miocic, where he stopped Stipe and just mauled him, basically. In a fight where that was a rematch, Stipe had beaten Ngannou via decision in their first fight, and that was a big setback for Ngannou, and he lost his very next fight in one of the most uneventful MMA fights I've ever seen. Ngannou versus Derek Lewis, Black Beast. It was basically two, again, of the hardest MMA punchers ever, and it ended up resulting in an uneventful stalemate. But when Ngannou had his last title defense against Cyril Gane, Ngannou had to resort to wrestling and basically outmaneuvering Cyril Gane on the ground rather than using any physical advantages or striking advantages in beating Cyril Gane, a great kickboxer, Muay Thai style fighter, just all around great stand-up game. Like, when John Jones beat Cyril Gane, he beat him like within a minute or something, but it was through his wrestling experience. He basically just got him in a headlock within the first minute, and it was over. But Jones didn't look great against Cyril Gane in the stand-up, and before Ngannou got Cyril Gane on the ground, Cyril Gane was winning those first 2 5-minute rounds in the stand-up. I thought that Cyril Gane was outmaneuvering Ngannou. Now, Ngannou was battling a knee injury at the time. His knee didn't look bad against Tyson Fury, and I thought that Ngannou might have still been carrying a knee injury heading into the Fury fight. Turns out, at least judging by what I saw, he doesn't still have that knee injury, and I think that knee injury might have compromised him in the stand-up in that fight against Cyril Gane. Now, for Anthony Joshua, one thing that I think is really going to benefit him coming into this fight is the fact that he's more active right now than he's been at any time for the past 7 years. Like, if you look at it, how many fights per year over the years Anthony Joshua's had, he had 3 fights in 2016. That's the last time he fought 3 times in a year. 2016, fought twice in 2017, twice in 2018, twice in 2019. Those were both against Andy Ruiz. Once in 2020, that was the COVID year, and so a lot of fighters were sidelined for much of that year. So once in 2020, once in 2021 against Usyk, once in 2022, the rematch against Usyk, and then he started to pick it up, where he had 3 fights in 2023 against Jermaine Franklin, Robert Helenius, and then in his latest fight against Otto Wallin. Now, a lot of people thought that Anthony Joshua would be vulnerable against Otto Wallin. I remember Chris Mannix and other, boxing, journalists and experts, and people thought that Otto Wallin had a great chance at pulling off the upset because of his technical skills and everything. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, who is Otto Wallin? We know that he had a good performance against Tyson Fury. We know that he's beaten Dominic Breazeale via decision. He beat Murat Gassiev, a blown up, I wouldn't say blown up, but a former cruiserweight who's got a limited skill set, kind of a one-dimensional-ish fighter. And, I made money on that fight. I don't bet on boxing often. I saw what the odds were, and I'm like, Murat Gassiev is a sizable favorite against Otto Wallin. Yeah, let me put some money on the Otto Wallin side. And yeah, I made money on that one. But I felt like performances like that kind of blew up Otto Wallin's reputation, and I think that his performance against Tyson Fury, where he gave Fury that huge cut, he had a good early 3 to 4 rounds. I thought that Wallin abandoned his game plan to go to Fury's body, started eye hunting once that cut opened up. I mean, I get why you would do that, but again, he abandoned much of what was working. But as you know, aside from those performances, it's not like Otto Wallin had beaten, the Dillian Whytes, even though that fight was once scheduled. Dillian Whyte pulled out due to injury, then came back to fight Tyson Fury. But it's not like Wallin beat Dillian Whyte, the Joseph Parkers, the Alexander Povetkins, Luis Ortiz, Andy Ruiz. He didn't go through Joe Joyce. Otto Wallin didn't do any of that. So heading into that Day of Reckoning event out in Riyadh, like I was thinking, yo, if anybody's going to pull off the upset, it's going to be the very good Joseph Parker against the limited and inactive Deontay Wilder. And I said that in the preview videos. I'm like, I think that there's a much greater chance of Joseph Parker beating Wilder than there is Otto Wallin beating Anthony Joshua. I just didn't see somebody with the lack of physicality and lack of, he doesn't have blazing hand speed. I'm talking about Otto Wallin. Doesn't have great power, doesn't have great speed. He's got good technique, but Anthony Joshua's got good technique. Don't let him getting outboxed by one of the greatest ever, Alexander Usyk, fool you. Anthony Joshua is a much better boxer than a lot of other good boxers. So I'm like, what, is Otto Wallin going to outclass Anthony Joshua, where Joshua's got the punching power edge, might have the hand speed advantage edge. He's got a slight size advantage. He's, more physical. So I thought that Anthony Joshua was going to take control of that fight against Otto Wallin. And I thought he was either going to win demonstratively on the scorecards or perhaps even stop Otto Wallin. He ended up stopping Otto Wallin within 5 rounds. And a lot of the boxing world was very impressed by that performance, as was I. I thought Anthony Joshua looked very good in that fight. He looked more certain. Again, I think that it was largely because of the opponent he was fighting, but he looked more comfortable in letting power punches go behind the jab. Other times he looks a little bit reluctant to mix it up, even though he was throwing a lot of hard punches at Jermaine Franklin and ended up launching right hands and eventually knocked Robert Helenius out. But Otto Wallin, the sense of danger wasn't there for Anthony Joshua. Coming into this fight against Ngannou, please believe there's going to be a great sense of danger. For all the punching power that Otto Wallin lacks, Francis Ngannou has in spades. For any hand speed that Otto Wallin lacks, I think that Francis Ngannou's got faster hands than Otto Wallin. Is he as, tit for tat technical from a sweet science perspective as Otto Wallin? Maybe not. Maybe he doesn't move like Otto Wallin. But look, Francis Ngannou seems to be picking up this boxing thing way quicker than we could have imagined. At least what we've seen in the observable evidence that we have. Now, maybe the wheels just totally come off this ride and Francis Ngannou looks like an amateur against Anthony Joshua. Maybe that happens. And again, Francis Ngannou is 37 years old. So time catches up with all of these fighters at different times, and sometimes it happens very suddenly. So maybe that's the case. I expect Anthony Joshua to be very measured in the first round or two against Ngannou. Maybe he lets 1 or 2 mean punches, like a hard right hand or a zipping left hook. Maybe he throws a couple to kind of test the waters. But I suspect that he's going to be level changing, feinting, moving a bit. I think there's going to be some nervous energy in Anthony Joshua. Now, it should also be mentioned, Anthony Joshua's had this change of trainer's trajectory. I think he's sticking with Ben Davison heading into this Ngannou fight, right? So he went from Rob McCracken, his longtime trainer, to then Robert Garcia, only for that Usyk rematch, and then Derek James for the 2 fights after that, Jermaine Franklin and Robert Helenius. And then for the Otto Wallin fight, it was Ben Davison. So I like the combination. I like Anthony Joshua with Davison. I liked Anthony Joshua with Derek James. I thought that he was using his jab effectively and just kind of getting more comfortable slowly, but starting to put, hard punches behind some of those jabs. But he was definitely jab heavy. I mean, you look at the jab battle between him and Robert Helenius. AJ had a lot of respect for Helenius' power, with good reason. Helenius throws a mean right hand and was dangerous at least for the first few rounds. Remember, that was supposed to be AJ versus Dillian Whyte too. So Helenius stepped in, with just like a few days, a very, very short notice. So the idea, at least as I saw it, was that Helenius would tire after the first few rounds, and he noticeably tired and then got knocked out in the 7th. But AJ, I expect, is going to be very reluctant to mix it up with Francis Ngannou. If Joshua is able to do things like, level change, feint, jab to the body, maybe a right hand to the body, which you got to be careful because Ngannou's a good counterpuncher and a pretty fast and devastatingly hard punching counterpuncher who I'm sure is still working on everything he was working on leading up to the Tyson Fury fight. And you look at the angles, like Ngannou was like keeping his head off the center line as he would come in and jab. Like Tyson Fury had to be impressed with what he was seeing. Again, what Ngannou showed us didn't look amateur to me. It didn't. Even when Ngannou started to get hit, his ability to keep his poise, to keep calm, to keep his wits about him, like he's been here a million times. It just looked like Ngannou was far more advanced than any of us would have imagined. But if Joshua is able to get away with jabbing and not receiving fire in return and is able to win rounds that way, I think he will happily take that. Now, there's a ton of pressure on Anthony Joshua. I felt like with Fury versus Ngannou, like boxing was kind of held in the balance. Like if Ngannou upset Tyson Fury, that would have been a tectonic shift in, you know, the boxing and MMA discussions, just the bragging rights and, you know, the idea that, oh, boxing requires these skills that you have to develop over the course of several years to even become competitive and stuff like that. I mean, even though the Jake Paul story is a crazy one, right? Well, if Francis Ngannou, granted, combat sports fighter and a mean stand-up fighter at that, but if he transitioned over to boxing and toppled and just he dropped, and if he were to have beaten Tyson Fury, boxing would have never heard the end of it. That would have been just, it was embarrassing as it was, as entertaining and as puzzling and as just remarkable and awe-inspiring of a performance and of an evening as that was. It was embarrassing for boxing and for boxing fans largely. A lot of people were asking a lot of questions like, what the hell is going on? Especially because Tyson Fury, he's not just a brute. So it's, you know, if Ngannou beat like Wilder or something like that, which, I mean, that could have gone either way, but I would have still expected Wilder to knock out Ngannou. But if Ngannou beat Wilder, you could have at least rationalized it as, okay, you've got a limited, you know, non-sweet science power puncher in Wilder against a novice in Ngannou, and they just let the bullets fly and this hard hitter won. But Tyson Fury, how do you justify that? Tyson Fury is kind of seen as being, you know, the gold standard in heavyweight boxing in terms of having skills plus the crazy size, right? Anthony Joshua is inheriting a lot of the pressure that comes in the wake of Fury versus Ngannou. So if Anthony Joshua beats, you know, Ngannou resoundingly or stops him, Anthony Joshua then has tons of bragging rights and you know, negotiating rights probably if he is ever to fight Tyson Fury. So given that context, how is AJ going to handle that pressure? How is he going to approach his fight? Does he feel like he needs the stoppage, that he really needs to soundly beat Francis Ngannou, where it can't be, you know, a close fight heading into the scorecards or anything like that? I'd imagine that he does know that. So what's he going to do about it? Again, if he could get away with jabbing and winning most of the rounds behind the jab without having to mix it up a ton, I think that once he sees the speed of Ngannou's counters, I think he'll be pretty happy with that. But again, Joshua is a gifted puncher and he's got pretty fast hands. There is just a possibility that Ngannou is the bigger, badder man between the two. As great as a puncher as Joshua's been through his career, it's possible that Ngannou's a harder puncher. It's possible that Ngannou has comparable hand speed to Anthony Joshua. And you couple that with maybe Ngannou having a slight reach advantage, a lot of the physical attributes and physical advantages that AJ usually has in his fights, he's not going to have those in this fight against Ngannou. So he's got to rely on that experience and on that skill. Now, if he, you know, employs that skill, is able to start landing, then puts the power behind it, okay, there's that. But to separate himself from Ngannou, it's got to be a skill thing. I don't think it's just going to be, let's let the bullets fly. And here's the thing. When Anthony Joshua got hurt the worst in his career, I mean, probably maybe even worse than when he got dropped by Vladimir Klitschko, but the beginning of the end against Andy Ruiz, where he first got hit after dropping Ruiz, what did he get hit with? It was a mid-exchange left hook. Francis Ngannou's got a mean left hook. Francis Ngannou, by the way, will also switch it up and fight southpaw. I wonder if he's going to be fighting some of this fight against AJ southpaw. Alexander Usyk is obviously a southpaw, but that's just something to to pay attention to. Is Ngannou going to be fighting most of this orthodox or southpaw? He switched to southpaw a lot against Tyson Fury, and you even saw Fury switching stances, trying to figure things out. Never really fully figured it out, which again is crazy. But Anthony Joshua, I'm sure, is he going to be gun shy to let that second and third punch go in the combination? So let's say he gets away with a jab to the body or hits him with a jab to now they're both in punching range, and then they both let the first power punch go. Maybe they trade right hands. And what usually comes next? Either one guy hesitates on throwing the hook, like I think it was Lee Wood who hesitated mid-exchange against Mauricio Lara in their first fight. One guy hesitated, the other guy threw that hook a little bit faster. Mauricio Lara did, caught Lee Wood with it, dropped him, pretty much ended the fight. Mid-exchange, is Anthony Joshua going to pull the trigger on that left hand? And if he does, is it going to be faster and more compact than Francis Ngannou's left hook? I am really looking to see if these guys exchange hooks. That would just be that would be a marvel to watch. That could be a game changer, a fight changer. Whoever lands that hook after they let the first power punch go and then let that second punch go. And if that second punch that they're exchanging is a hook, I really wonder what's going to happen there. But I'd imagine that Anthony Joshua would want to keep those moments at a minimum, because I feel like that's where Ngannou's got a chance at wobbling. Again, Andy Ruiz rocked and then dropped Anthony Joshua starting with that left hook. Francis Ngannou could very much hurt Anthony Joshua mid-exchange with the hook. So I think that Anthony Joshua is going to try to keep those moments from happening over and over again. Another thing, I think Ngannou might have a better chin than Anthony Joshua. Now, I think that both of these guys can hurt each other, but I feel like I've got more faith in Ngannou's chin than Anthony Joshua's chin. Not to say Joshua's chin-y. I mean, we've only seen him hurt a few times. We saw him hurt against Dillian White, when they fought several years ago. We saw him hurt obviously against Andy Ruiz, against Usyk, especially in their first fight. He got wobbled a couple of times in their first fight. Now, we saw AJ get bloodied up against Alexander Povetkin. We saw him get bloodied up against Robert Helenius, but he didn't get wobbled in the same way. Francis Ngannou could wobble and drop and stop Anthony Joshua. And there's a lot of reason to believe that Francis Ngannou can pull off the upset. Again, he might have the physical advantages. He might even have, again, the comparable hand speed, same or if not greater reach. He might just be the bigger and badder man between the two. And if that is the case, boy, are we going to be in for a stunner, because again, that will be a tectonic shift if Ngannou pulls this off. With all that said, I'm still just banking on Anthony Joshua's ability to fight competitive boxing fights. His experience, the amount of times that he's gone 12 rounds. He went 12 rounds in the rematch against Andy Ruiz, 12 rounds with Joseph Parker, with Jermaine Franklin, 12 rounds twice with the very high-paced Alexander Usyk. Usyk won both of those fights, one by unanimous decision, the second fight by split decision, but Joshua went the full distance both times. Joshua also has a few late stoppages. He stopped Kubrat Pulev in the 9th round, stopped Carlos Takam in the 10th round, stopped Vladimir Klitschko in the 11th round. He's got some late stoppages. So I trust his ability to carry his power late. And Ngannou, I thought, was kind of tiring in those, in the 9th and 10th round against Fury. In the rounds where if Ngannou, I thought that if he won both of those rounds, he probably would have or could have won the fight. I thought that he got a little bit tired there. But all that to say, Anthony Joshua just has so much experience. Fury had experience too. But Anthony Joshua has been in there with more good fighters than Tyson Fury has. By far, really. And this is a 10-rounder. It's not a 12-rounder. It's a 10-rounder. I can't bet again. I can't pick against Anthony Joshua in this context. Again, I wouldn't be blown away if Francis Ngannou not only beats, but if he stops Joshua. I think that that's a real possibility. I'm siding towards and favoring and going in the direction of the guy who's got the tons of elite boxing experience to beat the guy who's in his second professional boxing fight. I'm going to go Anthony Joshua here. But I'm also going to give Francis Ngannou the benefit of the doubt in having that granite chin. And I'm going to say Joshua wins the fight. Maybe even drop. You would think that if he drops Ngannou, he should stop Ngannou. What if Ngannou drops AJ? If Ngannou drops AJ, there's a good likelihood that he could stop AJ. I think that Anthony Joshua, not that he's going to be able to do the same thing against Ngannou that he did against Andy Ruiz. Again, Ngannou's feet and his legs are better than I thought that they were. I used to think that he was very stiff-legged and a little bit robotic, even when he was knocking people's heads off in the UFC. I thought that his legs and his footwork would be his undoing if he were to ever box a boxer. But again, I saw his feet against Fury, and not only was he able to get in range for certain shots, but he was able to throw certain punches and then get his feet to move just out of range to where when Fury would counter, Ngannou would make him miss by inches. I'm like, what am I watching? I still can't make sense of that. But he's got way more intelligent feet than I thought he would for boxing. But again, I cannot bet against Joshua in this context. I think he's got the ability to dig deep, but I know Francis Ngannou's got the ability to dig deep. I'm gonna side with experience on this one, even if it's against my greater judgment here, because like as I'm envisioning the fight happening, I can very much envision Ngannou winning this fight, but I'm going to go with Anthony Joshua, but not via stoppage. I'm going to go with Joshua via unanimous decision. I don't think he'll be able to just move around and outbox him in the way that he was able to outbox like the 6'3"-ish Andy Ruiz, who's got very slow feet. I don't think he'll be able to do that, but I think he'll be able to. Damn, something's got to give, because if he's winning a jab battle, can he win a jab battle and non-eventful? Look, I think that this fight might fail to entertain a lot of people. This might be a bit of a slow cooker, especially again if Anthony Joshua is somewhat reluctant and is satisfied with winning from the outside without really mixing it up. It would then be Ngannou to change that complexion. But again, I'm just going to go with Anthony Joshua's savvy, his boxing IQ, and his ability to win rounds from a sweet science standpoint. Again, hats off to Ngannou. We'll see if he continues his skill building and builds off of that crazy impressive performance against Tyson Fury. Unbelievable. I just cannot say that enough. I'm still trying to wrap. Look, if you want an entertaining YouTube view, watch Boxing Wave's reaction to that fight as that fight's playing out. I feel like a lot of us fight fans can relate to that reaction, because I think we were all falling out of our seats watching how this was unfolding. And not only during the knockdown, but in the first and second round when Ngannou was boxing competitively before the knockdown and after the knockdown. I think we were all just on the edge of our seats like, whoa. But yeah, I'm going to go with Anthony Joshua to beat Francis Ngannou via decision. I don't know how he's going to do it exactly, but I think it's going to be using a lot of jabs, a lot of range control, getting in and out, a lot of feints. But Ngannou's quick. Ngannou's got good reflexes. Ngannou likes to counter. And Joshua's going to have to be careful. But again, Ngannou's got to respect Anthony Joshua's power, maybe even more so than he was respecting Tyson Fury's power. And he was respecting Fury's power, and he was fighting, again, very intelligently, defensively. I'm going to go with Anthony Joshua to hold it down and to win a decision here. Let me know your thoughts. I'm having trouble breaking this one down because of some of those dynamics that I'm discussing, and because I'm not exactly sure what exactly to take away from Fury versus Ngannou. But I'm going with AJ via decision in this one. Let me know your thoughts. Who do you have winning and how, and what happens in the heavyweight division in the wake of this? I know that a lot of what happens in the heavyweight division is going to be predicated on what happens with Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this one in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.